Hi everyone, welcome to the US CPA classes for business analysis and reporting examination. So this class of state and local governmental accounting, I'll be walking you through in detail about fund balance and component topic in the typical item and specific type of transaction and event measurement, calculation and presentation in the government entity financial statement. So let's understand more in detail about fund balance and the component reporting requirement under the state and local government accounting.
कैपिटल इन्वेस्टमेंट होगी सर, ये होगा मेरे हिसाब से 1.
How about others? This is unrestricted component of net position.
सर अनरिस्ट्रिक्टेड क्यों है?
Let me see. The city council designate fund in the enterprise fund for future equipment placement. So it is being internally designated.
राइट, एक्सटर्नली कुछ नहीं है, कंस्ट्रेंट ठीक है.
Right. Okay, fund balance and component. Okay, so we'll do this and then maybe we can take a quick small break. So fund balance and component. What is fund balance? Fund balance, now we are discussing about fund financial statement. Let's assume we are talking about fund financial statement. So fund balance represent the net asset of governmental fund, and it's categorized into 5 categories: restricted, committed, assigned, unassigned, and non-spendable. Right? So these are the 5 categories in which you designate this fund. Right? So okay, right. So restricted, committed, assigned, unassigned, and non-spendable, based on an analysis of the assets and liability with the priority order of spending if the policy isn't established. So fund balances, like earlier we were talking about government-wide financial statement. There are finally 3 items in the net position. One is net investment, second is restricted, third is unrestricted. But now coming to the fund financial statement. So fund financial statement, fund are of 5 categories. What are those 5 categories? Restricted, committed, assigned, unassigned, and non-spendable. So I think let me reshuffle them in this sequence. So first one is restricted, second is committed, third is assigned, fourth is unassigned, and fifth one is non-spendable, right? So what is restricted fund balance? Now just think about one particular fund balance, right? In that particular fund balance, for example, COVID care fund, like PM COVID care fund. I know each one of you are very well aware of it, right? Same way in US also there would be COVID care fund they might have created, right? So the government has created a COVID care fund to support the COVID victims, or maybe the people who are dying or who are not well, or there are like health issues on account of COVID. So in that case of scenario, what will be considered as restricted fund balance, what will be the committed fund balance, what will be the assigned fund balance, or what will be unassigned, and the last one is non-spendable fund balance. Right? So let's keep that COVID care fund in your mind and let's try to understand one by one each of these 5 concepts. The first one is restricted fund balance. Restricted balance constrained by source such as restricted debt proceeds, specific tax revenue, contribution, share revenue, etc., and assets held under restricted grant arrangements are typically offset by deferred revenues and do not contribute to the fund balance. So restricted fund balance is basically where utilization of the particular fund is being restricted for the particular purpose only, and you cannot utilize that money for other than the specific purpose for which the restriction has been imposed, right? Second is committed fund. Committed fund is basically source with constraint imposed by the highest level of formal action of the governing body. So this is like management commitment basically, right? It is not imposed by the donor, or it is not imposed by the authority who is providing the grant. It is being internally imposed by the management, internally committed by the management, which can only be removed or modified by the same level of action by the governing body, right? Third one is assigned fund balance. Certain fund balance has been assigned for specific activity. So that is considered as assigned fund balance. So represent the sources that an original or group with delegate authority from the governing body has formally indicated the intent to constrain the specific purpose, right? So assigned is, that means you have already aligned the money for the specific purpose, right? Fourth one is unassigned fund balance. You have cash in hand balance, you have journal reserve, you have like other retention monies, right? But you have not allocated that money for any specific purpose yet. So that money which is in your hand, which is in your bank account, is considered to be as unassigned fund balance, that is free fund balance, right? The residual amount of the fund balance in journal fund available for any lawful purpose after considering the other fund balance category is called unassigned fund balance. Non-spendable fund balance represent the balance of material, supplies, prepaid item held in the government fund for at a year end, and report in the journal fund when there's a long-term receivable or property acquired for resale without specific restriction, and also apply it to the sources legally required to be maintained intact, such as endowment principle. So non-spendable fund is basically the fund which you have invested already in purchasing the inventory, right, or supplies or the prepaids, right? So the amount which you cannot spend further because that's already you have spent it for inventory, supplies, or prepaids, or for any legal matters, right? So that is called non-spendable fund. So first one is restricted fund. Restricted fund is restriction from the outside authority, that means from the other government body, that this particular fund has to be utilized for this particular purpose. Second is committed fund. Committed fund is committed by internal management that this much amount will be using for this particular purpose. Third is assigned fund balance. That means fund balance you have assigned for particular activity. Fourth one is unassigned fund balance. It's like a free cash flow. And the last one is non-spendable. That means the amount which you cannot spend, which you have already committed, or for which there is already certain restriction, or you can say the amount you have already invested in purchasing the inventories, materials, supplies, or prepaids. Those are called non-spendable because the item has already been spent. Right? Makes sense? What are the fund balance? What are the fund categories?
सर एक डाउट है सर,
Yes, please.
रिस्ट्रिक्टेड फंड बैलेंस में जो ये लाइन लिखी है ना, एसेट्स हेल्ड अंडर रिस्ट्रिक्टेड ग्रांट एग्रीमेंट्स आर टिपिकली ऑफसेट बाय डेफर्ड रेवेन्यूज
And do not contribute to the fund balance.
इसका नहीं मेरे को मीनिंग क्लियर होगा.
Okay. So assets held under restricted grant agreement are typically offset by deferred revenue and do not contribute to the fund balance. So here what it means is when you receive any grant for, let's say, to build any hospital, let's assume, right? And for that grant, when you are you can say when you have received the money, so at that point of time it is your deferred revenue, right? And slowly and gradually you start utilizing that and start recognizing the revenue.
Okay.
So what it says, one side is the asset, on the other side is it's your deferred revenue, which you can net it off and do not contribute to the fund balance. Okay, so let me put in an example. So here, for example, there are two things: asset, liability, and net position. So you have these three things: assets, liability, and you have net position. So in the asset, what they are saying, restricted fund balance. That means you have received an amount, right? You have received, when you have received an amount, so what will be the journal entry you might have made?
Cash account debit.
Cash account debit to
Fund revenue.
deferred revenue.
Deferred revenue, yes.
Right. So here there will be an asset. Let's say it is $100,000. So you will be recognizing this $100,000 as asset of cash, right? And you will be recognizing liability for deferred revenue. So what is your net position? It's neutral. Sorry.
Mhm.
This minus this is neutral.
Right.
Now just look at this. Asset held under the restricted grant agreement are typically offset by deferred revenue and do not contribute to the fund balance.
So
Make sense?
yes, ये मतलब basically जो 1 million हुआ, this would not be a part of fund balance. Yes, क्योंकि
No, you will reflect in the fund balance, but
हाँ,
the impact is cash neutral.
हाँ impact cash neutral है, but वैसे funds में आपका number दिखेगा कि हाँ इतना है क्योंकि we obviously received it, correct?
Yes, I can add this. Uh, 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 I would say fund received to uh, fund received to let's say dollar fund received to provide $100,000 fund received to right? So this is your assets. This is the current liability, right?
Right, sir.
Net impact on fund balance. That is assets minus right. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right, everyone?
Sir,
Good. Okay. Okay. So this we have covered. Encumbrances. Okay. Encumbrances are basically the liabilities, or you can say, for which you have, like issued any debt or something, right? Encumbrances to be paid from unassigned resources are reported as assignment of fund balance unless the approval of encumbrance required for some formal action or commitment. And committed fund balance is reported if existing resources is assigned or unassigned fund balance are expected to cover general long-term liabilities mature in the next period. Encumbrance is basically the liability. If you have to make the payments of those liability, then how the respective fund balance will get reduced. That is what it is being presented here. So encumbrance to be paid from unassigned resources are reported as assigned fund to the balances, right? Unless the approval of encumbrance is required for some formal process or action from the committed fund. The last one is committed fund balance are reported if the existing resources assigned or unassigned fund balance are expected to cover the general long-term liability maturing the next period. Budgeting impact: budget to use part of otherwise unassigned fund balance to cover the deficit between next year budget revenue and expense. Once again. Budgeting revenue is being used as a part of unassigned fund balance to cover the deficit between next year budget revenue and the expenditure results is an equal amount being reported as assigned fund balance. So budget adoption affect the fund balance classification in a way with no other impact. So budget will have like no impact on the overall financial statement. It is just an allocation of the respective fund for the respective purposes. So all these 5 categories of the fund, you will see there are few balances which is being mandatory. For example, restricted fund balance, right? And you can say the non-spendable fund balance. Whereas assigned fund balance, unassigned fund balance, and committed fund balance is on the management discretionary. So this, as per the management discretionary, they can make their own respective budget for the respective category. Right? Some limitation on reporting of fund balance classification also exists, which is restricted and committed fund balance. Like I said, reporting the stabilization revenue as restricted or committed fund balance require a specific non-routine circumstances to be used, or merely indicating that there is the resources can be used for the emergency or budget shortfall is not considered to be a specific or non-routine activity. The last one is fund balance assignment limitation. So fund balance assigned can be made for any reason if it would cause or increase a deficit in unassigned fund balance in a fund, right? So this is like fund financial statement. Majorly what you need to keep in mind is these 5 categories of fund, and this allocation is being required in the fund financial statement. So what amount you will be considered in the restricted fund balance? This is very important. The amount which is being restricted by the guarantor or by the provider of the fund for the specific purpose need to be disclosed as a restricted fund. Second is non-spendable fund. That means the amount which you have already spent, or it is an endowment fund that you have the money, but you are not authorized to utilize that money. Then other than that, there are three category of fund: committed fund, assigned fund, or an assigned fund. Committed fund is being committed by the management. Assigned fund is also being assigned by the management, and unassigned fund is the free cash in hand. Right? So two quick questions. First one is community college, a public institution, had the following encumbrance at 31st December year end: outstanding purchase order $12,000 and committed for the services not received $50,000. What amount of these encumbrance should be reported as a liability in the community balance sheet year end December? So this is called commitment. Do we need to report the commitment into the balance sheet? Like open purchase order, open commitment. Do we disclose that?
Outstanding purchase order तो करेंगे disclose.
No, do we report that? Disclosure is one thing, but do we report that do we pass the journal entry for the same? Basically, my question is.
Outstanding purchase order, है ना? Yes, sir.
What? Just read the question again. Community college, a public institution, had the following encumbrances. That means commitment. Right? Outstanding purchase order. That means open purchase order for which you have requested to supply the material, but as of now you have not received. Commitments of services. So services you have committed, but you have not received the services yet. Right? Huh?
$0 ही होगा, कुछ भी report नहीं होगा.
Yes. Only the disclosure required, but no actual reporting is required because you have not received, neither received the product nor received the services.
ऊपर पढ़ के वो लग रहा है कि encumbrances लिखा है, नीचे ऐसे outstanding purchase order पढ़ते हैं तो ऐसा लगता है कि तब आपने already purchase order ले लिया है and then now you have to actually pay it. So I thought कि maybe a journal entry has to be recorded.
No, how it happened, like you issue the purchase order to the vendor, and basis the purchase order, vendor make the supplies to you.
Right.
So you have issued, that means you have shown the commitment from your side to purchase the material from the respective vendor. But unless and until he or she has given you the material, why do you recognize expense?
Right. कुछ आना चाहिए ना, वो आया ही नहीं हमारे पास. Okay. Correct.
Right. Same way, service also you have not received. You have shown an interest, like for example, I have shown an interest that I will involve 𝐂𝐴𝐺 in some work from the next month, right? So I have shown a commitment from my side, but 𝐂𝐴𝐺 has not yet rendered the services. So why do I book in my accounts?
Right. Okay.
Right. So one second. Next question. Yeah. So Delhi City is accumulating financial resources that are legally restricted to the payment of general long-term debt principal and interest maturing in future year. At December 31st, $5 million has been accumulated for principal payment and $300,000 has been accumulated for interest payment. These restricted funds should be accounted for what? Debt service fund or journal fund? How much is the debt service fund and how much is the journal fund? So the call of the question is Delhi City accumulating the financial resources that are legally restricted to the payment of journal long-term debt and principal and interest maturing in future. In December 31st, you have $5 million has been accumulated for principal and $300,000 is interest payment. So these restricted fund should be accounted for. How much is the debt service fund and how much should be the general fund? What is debt service fund? If you remember, like last to last class, we have discussed about debt service fund.
Particularly service the debt obligations of the government. तो मतलब
Here we discuss our debt service fund. So account for the accumulation and use of resources for the payment of long-term debt, principal and
correct. Yes, sir.
So what will be the amount for the debt service fund?
टोटली हो गया सर, दोनों हो गया 53 लाख 50 प्लस जो भी इंटरेस्ट किया नीचे.
Yeah. So which one?
Sir, I think general fund should be zero, sir. One होगा.
First option,
Yes, sir.
right? So that is absolutely right. Right. So it's around 1235 or 1240.